Hey, we have all three bars. How about that? Well, anyway, I apologize in advance on the frog in my throat. I may be clearing my throat, and I apologize. So bear with me. Hopefully, I won't have to do that too often. Anyway, Frank, would you feel comfortable praying us in? Thank you very much, Frank. And as Frank mentioned, we are continuing our summer study in the Psalms. Last week, we looked at Psalm 10, and we're going to look at a couple of verses at a couple of Psalms. We don't want to overlook them completely. But Psalm 11, a couple of verses to look at here. And if you enjoy or if you like to note or underline key passages in the Bible, here are two verses to look or to note. Verse 5, basically, Psalm 11 is a message about having confidence in God even when evil seems to prevail. David writes, beginning in verse 5, the Lord examines the righteous, but the wicked, those who love violence, he hates with a passion. On the wicked he will rain. Fiery coals and burning sulfur, a scorching wind will be their lot. And then he continues in the next psalm, Psalm 12, where he asks for deliverance from unfaithful and untrustworthy people. We've known at least one or two of those type in our lifetime, so we can relate to this. But skip on down to verse 7, where David writes, you, Lord, will keep the needy safe and will protect us forever from the wicked, who freely strut about when what is vile is honored by the human race. So, skipping along, that brings us to Psalm 13. Um, Rather short psalm, but there's a lot to unpack here. But first, let's read through it, and then we'll go back and look at it. Psalm 13. For the director of music, a psalm of David. How long, O Lord, will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? How long must I wrestle with my thoughts and day after day have sorrow in my heart? How long will my enemy triumph over me? Look on me and answer, Lord, O Lord my God. Give light to my eyes, or I will sleep in death. And my enemy will say, I have overcome him, and my foes will rejoice when I fall. But I trust in your unfailing love. My heart rejoices in your salvation. I will sing the Lord's praise, for he has been good to me. How long, O Lord? Gee, this doesn't start on a happy note. In fact, Darren and I were talking in the class last Sunday. You can kind of you can read one too many of these Psalms of David, and you have to fight back the thought, David, man up here. You know, good grief, I'm tired of your complaining. Just you kind of get that feeling that starts settling in the back of your head. How many of these psalms did he write? I kind of this psalm kind of reminds me of a song that was popular not so long ago. You've had a bad day, you're taking one down, you sing a sad song just to turn it around. You had a bad day. I'll spare you singing the whole thing, or you might run out of here screaming. But yeah, that was kind of popular. In fact, it was so popular that for a while, the show American Idol, when they would use this as the theme song for the goodbye video for the contestants that were voted off the show. And you could almost do a video for poor old David. Uh, have little scenes of him, Saul throwing a spear at him, just missing him by this much, or he's running from Saul, and Saul's on one end of the mountain and David's on the other side. They're that close to David being caught and killed. You hear that music in the background. You've had a bad day, you're taking one down. This is Oh, yeah. How long has this? Yes, yes. That works too. That's right. And boy, is David complaining. I tell you what. In fact, um, you can 6 verses, but there's so much we could talk about. In fact, you can kind of dice it and slice it. 6 verses, you can cut them up into 3 parts, 2 verses each. Part 1, David despairs. Part 2, David's prayers. Part 3, David declares. I made that all up all by myself. So if poetic stuff like that kind of grates on you, it's on me, not anyone else. But yeah, look at those first 2 verses. How long, O Lord? How long? Look at how many times he uses how long. At least 4. I mean, he opens every question, every sentence, every statement with how long? How long, O Lord, will you forget me? Forever? And spoiler alert, we should mention that, in terms of the God who we serve, um, God does not forget. God can never forget, he says. Make a note of Isaiah chapter 49, verses 14 through 16, where he tells the Israelites, he says, hey guys, can a mother forget the baby at her breast and have no compassion on the child she's born? Though she may forget, and it's very rare indeed that you have moms who just are totally neglectful. There's that just basic maternal instinct. Mom has baby, she's going to take care of him. Well, God says, you see that mother with the baby, mother and child? I'm kind of like that. In fact, I'm not just kind of like it. I'm more than like that. There may be those rare instances where you have a mom who just isn't a mom at all, but that will never happen to me, and that will never change the relationship I have with you, Israel. Don't you know? How long did it take the Israelites? And this was right after God delivers them from the Egyptians. They walk through dry land on the Red Sea, and they're headed toward the Promised Land. How long did it take them to start complaining about how God was forgetting them? And yeah, just human nature. Got to look for something to complain about. And intellectually, and if we think about it long enough, hey, count the number of times God has come to your rescue when you were in trouble, when you had one crisis or another, and it was one of those crises where you felt like if I'm not delivered from this, if I don't get what I absolutely need, I am going to die, or the next best thing to it, next worst thing to it. I'm going to be disgraced forever. And the Lord comes to your rescue, just in time. Maybe not on your timeline, but definitely on his, but he takes care of you. But here David is saying, how will you forget me forever? How long are you going to hide your face from me? Those are the two complaints from David. Lord, you've forgotten all about me, as though I've just dried up and don't exist. Either that or you're hiding from me. I pray to you, I call out to you, and you don't answer, or I get no answer at all, or if I do get an answer, it's not the one I'm looking for. It's not the answer I need. And David knows better. I mean, how long must I wrestle with my thoughts? And day after day, all day, I have sorrow in my heart. David is a guy here who is just being ruled by his feelings. He just knows. I mean, intellectually, he should know better, but, he's having a bad day. And we've all had days like that. Sometimes we've had running multiple days, weeks, months, where we've made up our minds in our collective wisdom, in our internal wisdom. This is the way it is, and it's not going to get any better, and God's not taking care of me. And you might say we're letting our emotions rule and our feelings rule our thinking. We are ruled by our feelings and not the truth. And the truth is, God watches over us. God takes care of us. Sometimes not in the way that we expect, sometimes not on the timeline that we're looking at, but God comes to our rescue. There's when you have a situation like that, especially where you're just being overrun by these dark, pessimistic feelings, might help to remember one proverb, and that's from Proverbs chapter 3, verse 5. Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. That's the answer to wrestling with my thoughts, or as your translation, another translation reads, when you're taking counsel in your soul, when you're being ruled by your inner thoughts. When, we talk about how does your heart feel? The heart, that figuratively speaking, the heart is the seat of all human emotions. That's not only what you think, but how you think, how you interpret things. If you let your feelings run over and run rampant, take charge and take control, you can wind up saying and doing a lot of rash things. Watch that self-talk that you're giving yourself. It's how easy is it to fall into that negativity trap? Easier than you think. You can just, in a split second, you can discover that you have been talking yourself into a bad situation or to making bad decisions. But David here is, by the end of verse 2, he is convinced that his enemies are just going to run rampant over him. They're going to conquer him. They're going to triumph over me. They're not only triumph over me, they're going to be exalted. They're going to have a victory party at his expense. And David complains about this, but he also and not explicitly said or stated, but implied, hey God, if this happens to me, I'm not the only one who's going to be humiliated and embarrassed, because they're not just embarrassing me, they're embarrassing you, because my enemies are your enemies. God, you got to do something here. Well, that's David in a state of despair, as we said. Move on to verse 3. Move on to David's prayers. Look on me and answer. Lord, oh Lord my God, give light to my eyes. Enlighten me, Father, or I will sleep in death. I will sleep the sleep of death. Not just spiritually, but maybe even physically. My enemies will kill me. Enlighten me, O Lord. Kind of this maybe that's what Paul was thinking about when he wrote to the Ephesians in the opening verses, chapter 1, verses 17 through 19. And essentially that section says, where says, hey, I'm praying for you guys, and I'm praying that the eyes of your heart may be enlightened, in order that you may know the hope to which God has called you. It's so easy when we start following this negativity train that how much it rules your thoughts. It really is a sleep. It is a slumber because you're not responding. You're unresponsive. You're not paying attention to what God may be saying to you. And later on in Ephesians, Paul addresses that spiritual slumbering. He says, "Wake up, O sleeper, rise from the dead, and Christ will shine on you." There are times when you just gotta, hey, maybe pinch yourself or whatever. Say, "Wake up, buddy. This is not the way you should be thinking or acting or behaving or whatever. God's in your corner. Don't forget about that." But I need some assurance, God. Look on me and answer me. Enlighten my eyes. Or I'll sleep the sleep of death. My enemy will say, I have overcome him. I have prevailed against him. And my foes will rejoice when I fall. Lord, I trust you. I know you're there, but I'm feeling kind of needy right now. I really could use a reassuring word from you, a reassuring act of something that says, hey, I'm here and I'm taking care of you. David is really pouring out his soul, and he's having done that. Last two verses, he brings it all back to praising God. That's the third section where David declares. This is his declaration. But I trust in your unfailing love. My heart rejoices in your salvation. I will sing the Lord's praise, for he has been good to me. There's more than one way to interpret David's original Hebrew in here. You can interpret it where it reads, I have trusted, or I will trust in your steadfast love. My heart will rejoice. My heart is already rejoicing in your salvation, in your deliverance. We've talked earlier about it. And when David writes these Psalms, he's writing in the language of faith. And in some cases, that language, the original Hebrew, can be interpreted in more than one verb tense. And something that we call the language of faith or prophetic perfect, where David is writing and talking about God's deliverance as though it has already happened. Even though physically, probably at that moment of crisis, it hasn't happened yet. But David's faith is renewed, having poured out his heart, having complained, and just really bent the ear of God. David says, I know you're going to come through for me. I know you will deliver me. In fact, I'm already visualizing it. I'm seeing it in my head. I know it's not only going to happen, it has happened. That's how strong David's faith is. I have trusted in your love. I'm already rejoicing that I'm being delivered. That I'm being saved from this existential threat here. And I'm singing the Lord's praise. I will sing to the Lord because he has been good to me. Other translations, because he has dealt bountifully with me. God has dealt generously with me. Yeah, right now it doesn't look all that generous, doesn't look all that wonderful, but I know it's coming. I have a check from God, and it's already been deposited in the bank, and I know it's good. I can draw from it. That's how confident I am. Not bad for someone who just 5 verses earlier felt like God had just packed up and moved off and forgotten all about him. Talk about a 180-degree change here. But one more example of how David pours out his heart. He makes it very clear to God, how he feels and how desperate he feels. That, yeah, too much of a bad thing like that can kind of wear you out on Psalms, but there's a encouraging message on that, because if David can do that, if David can be that unpleasant and despairing and even that rude toward God, what does that say about us? It says that we can have that kind of relationship with God as well. We can be that pointed. We can be that frank and candid with God in our prayers. Hey God, where are you? I'm hurting all over, and I feel like you haven't noticed. I know better. Intellectually, I know better, but emotionally, this is how I feel. Lord, I need you to, if nothing else, to rescue me from my feelings, so that my emotions don't take charge and make me, and I wind up saying and doing things that I'm going to regret. Psalm 13. Food for thought. How long, O Lord? Well, only as long as God thinks it's necessary, and then God will come to the rescue. God will answer your prayer in his own way and on his own timetable. Well, do we, uh, one more little chat here about, we've talked about how many of the Psalms are called messianic because they point to the coming of the Messiah, the coming of Christ. Do we see Jesus here in Psalm 13? Well, it kind of, sort of. First of all, we know that there was one point where God or Jesus felt God's face was hidden from him. Um, Next week, we're going to look at a verse that opens up, my God, why have you forsaken me? And Jesus cries out that question when he's on the cross. Uh, Jesus didn't want God's enemies to win over him, and he did everything he could to make sure that didn't happen. Key example is early in Jesus' ministry when he goes into the wilderness, spends 40 days, and he's confronted by Satan, and he has all sorts of temptations thrown at him, and Jesus resists. Uh, Check out Matthew 4 and Luke chapter 4. Both of them have accounts of that temptation where Jesus overcomes. And did Jesus sleep the sleep of death? Well, yeah, he died on the cross, but it was not a permanent death. It was only during that 3-day period where he was crucified and buried, and at the end of that period, we know he resurrected, and he's living today. So Jesus has overcome the things that are spelled out here, especially in terms of things that you know most of us human beings, most of us men and women are very afraid of, including physical death. Jesus experienced that. Jesus overcame that. So we can pray through Jesus. We can pray a prayer of confidence with God. We have a few more minutes, and as I mentioned, we're not looking at every psalm in the book, but we need to look at a few to get us to where we want to be next Sunday. And so I'll read one or two verses from some of these other psalms. Going on to Psalm 14. This you probably are going to recognize the opening verse because this is Psalm 14 talks about the folly of those who ignore God. And verse 1 reads, "The fool says in his heart, there is no God. They are corrupt. Their deeds are vile. There is no one who does good." Psalm 15, kind of a natural progression. Well, if you don't want to ignore God, but you want to keep company with God, how do you do that? Starting with verse 2. Here is kind of a good guide. How do you keep company with God? Well, the one whose walk is blameless, who does what is righteous, who speaks the truth from their heart, whose tongue utters no slander, who does no wrong to a neighbor, who casts no slur on others, who despises a vile person but honors those who fear the Lord. who keeps an oath even when it hurts, does not change their mind, who lends money to the poor without interest, who does not accept a bribe against the innocent. These who do these things will never be shaken. And then Psalm 16. This is Psalm 16 is kind of a nice change of pace, seeing as how we've talked about how David kind of complains in a lot of his verses. This this is a very nice psalm here, especially when you get to verse 5, where he praises God and what he has done for David. He says, Lord, verse 5, Lord, you alone are my portion and my cup. You make my lot secure. And I love this verse here, verse 6. The boundary lines have fallen for me in pleasant places. Surely I have a delightful inheritance. Psalm 17 is a prayer for protection and vindication. And go mark down to verse 8, where David writes, keep me as the apple of your eye. I love that phrase. Hide me in the shadow of your wings. I like that phrase too. Hide me from the wicked who are out to destroy me, from my mortal enemies who surround me. And then skipping down to verse 13. Rise up, Lord, confront them, bring them down with your sword. Rescue me from the wicked. By your hand, save me from such people, Lord. As for me, I will be vindicated and will see your face. Psalm 18. Very interesting psalm because it offers a perspective of how people view God. There are two basic sides here. One is how good people view God, and then the other is how not so good people view God. Verse 25. To the faithful, you show yourself faithful. To the blameless, you show yourself blameless. To the pure, you show yourself pure. But to the devious, you show yourself shrewd. You save the humble, but bring low those whose eyes are haughty. Psalm 19. And that's a few verses here might be familiar to many of us. Psalm 19 opens verse 1. The heavens declare the glory of God. The skies proclaim the work of his hands. And then skipping down to verse 7. The law of the Lord is perfect, refreshing the soul. The statutes of the Lord are trustworthy, making wise the simple. The precepts of the Lord are right, giving joy to the heart. The commands of the Lord are radiant, giving light to the eyes. Verse 10, they are more precious than gold, than much pure gold. They are sweeter than honey from the honeycomb. By them your servant is warned. In keeping them, there is great reward. Psalm 19 is very interesting. You get a lot of a lot of truth, a lot of imagery here. Gee, can you get more detail than this? Well, actually, yes. We're not going to get to it in the study, but take take a little time sometime this week and read Psalm 19 and then compare it. Turn over to Psalm 119, which kind of covers the same concept in much greater detail. In fact, Psalm 19, in fact, is the longest psalm in the book. It's also the longest chapter in the entire Bible. So take a little time reading it. In fact, how long is it? Well, it's longer than some other books in the Bible because it's like 176 verses. Psalm 20 is an appeal by David for victory in battle. Verse 1, may the Lord answer you when you are in distress. May the name of the God of Jacob protect you. Skipping down to verse 7. Very key thought here. Some trust in chariots and some in horses, but we trust in the name of the Lord our God. And then Psalm 21, David is on a roll here. Hey, we've been victorious in battle and I'm feeling good. I'm praising God. Where do you get the source of your confidence? Where does all your your victorious stuff come from? David talks about that. Psalm 21, verse 1. The king rejoices in your strength, Lord. How great is his joy in the victories you give. Skip down to verse 5. Through the victories you gave, his glory is great. You have bestowed on him splendor and majesty. Surely you have granted him unending blessings and made him glad with the joy of your presence. For the king trusts in the Lord. Through the unfailing love of the Most High, he will not be shaken. And then skipping down to verse 13. Be exalted in your strength, Lord. We will sing and praise your might. So that brings us up to Psalm 22. And that's going to be the focus of our lesson next Sunday. So if you have a little time, take a look at Psalm 22. And Lord willing, we'll meet back here next Sunday and we'll talk about it. Thank you very much for your time and attention. I hope you enjoy the lesson. Hope you got something out of it. And have a great week.